everyone, and welcome to the Winging It F1 podcast review of I thought, very enjoyable, very entertaining Canadian Grand Prix. The first time we've been in Montreal since 2019, although we weren't in Montreal because we don't have that kind of travel budget yet. But we will be discussing the race. And to join me for that is Freddie Coates and Nigel Shue, who is a man who watched his first Love Island episode Saturday night. Nigel, what did you think of it?
It was on Friday, Adam. They don't do it on Saturdays, mate. Come on.
Yeah, it's unseen bits.
What do they do on Saturday? Oh, Freddie.
Oh, sorry.
What did you think of it, Nigel?
It's not my cup of tea, to be honest. It's a bit like F1.
Did you prefer it or the race?
Yeah. Where? I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
What?
Freddie, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. I really enjoyed the race. I have answers to questions. Unlike Nigel, it seems. I really enjoyed the race. I'm in a good place. This is the last podcast that we'll do from this Zoom setting if you're watching on YouTube, and from this acoustic setting if you're listening in the world. So that means nothing to most people apart from me, unless there's some breaking news in the next 3 or 4 days. So unless we have unless Lewis Hamilton signs for Alfa Romeo or something, probably won't have a podcast in the next few days where we need to do an emergency pod. But who knows? I've probably jinxed it now, and Joe Guanyu's going to actually sign for Mercedes instead. Yeah,
I feel like if there's any breaking news that in the next few days, then it's got Freddie's fingerprints all over it. But yes, Freddie is moving out of his place in Sheffield, and we won't have any Sheffield presence for the first time in a while. Well, until I move back in. So
since we start, probably since a few weeks ago, actually.
Okay. Well,
there was probably a point when me and Nigel were both at home. I think we're delving too much into this.
Yes.
Canada.
Anyway.
Canada, yes. Canada happened, and it was won by Max Verstappen.
What?
He, on paper, he led every single lap, or was he? No, he didn't. He always looked in control. But there was some pressure coming on him, especially at the end, from Carlos Sainz. There's a message on here saying Verstappen's best week on our planning document. It didn't say when, though. Is that this season, or is that just ever in his entire life, or like
this season? It's got to be.
Is it his best season of his life?
Nigel, you wrote it in the planning doc.
Yeah.
What's your question?
I think it's one of his best weekend performances in his F1 career for me. I think last year France and Zandvoort were like two of his best, but this year, in Canada, to top every segment of qualifying, Q1, Q2, Q3 in the wet, really tough conditions. And then he switched his tyres on as well. He blitzed the field, quite frankly. He never looked like he wasn't not going to get pole. I think that was really impressive. And, he said Sainz and Ferrari had the faster car on Sunday, which is something Sainz himself has admitted. And I think anytime you win and you don't have the fastest car, I think that's got to be really, an incredible performance. And I think it was. He didn't put a foot wrong on Saturday or Sunday at all, under the pressure, especially during those last 15 laps. Sainz made a tiny mistake on the penultimate lap, I think it was, at the hairpin, which cost him any chance. And when he was quite close going into there, and that cost him a chance of potentially overtaking him. And that was the kind of mistake Sainz was looking for from Verstappen. But Verstappen never made those small errors. And I think under that kind of pressure is really impressive. So that, with the qualifying performance, I think it's definitely his best weekend performance this year, and one of his best in his 7 years in F1 for me.
I think with the qualifying performance, the question I have is of competition. Leclerc wasn't a factor, and Perez went out in Q2. So, I think the topping every session, while impressive, I think there's kind of that question mark. But I think certainly in the race, to keep up that pressure and be able to deliver that kind of performance. And to me, as much as I was excited in the last chunk of the race after the safety car, it always felt like Verstappen was in control. And I don't think, if it looked like it'd be very difficult for Sainz to pass. And to be honest, I think if Sainz had passed, there's a very good chance Verstappen might have just blown past the next lap anyway. So I think in terms of race, it was very, very dominant. And compare that to the last time we were in Canada, where there was someone leading with the slower car and they made a mistake that cost them the race. I think you can contrast those, and Verstappen didn't put a foot wrong, as you say.
Yeah, Adam makes a great point to compare it to the last time we saw a long, big pressure point there, because it was very easy to make a mistake in the same way that both of you said. He was exemplary. Sainz was also impressive. I think his mistake at the end can be more forgiven in compared to Verstappen, because Verstappen was more hitting marks, whereas Sainz had to go over a level into that hairpin quite a few times. I think actually quite a lot of the time he did go over that level on where you think the car should be able to be going into that hairpin and make it stick. So I think Sainz had some really, really well controlled moments that would have been hairy for most other drivers going with that amount of speed into a lot of those corners, which is testament to the Ferrari, but testament to Sainz as well. So I think to be honest, the Sunday performance from both of those drivers was phenomenal. The Saturday performance from Max was phenomenal. Admittedly, as Adam says, without that kind of thorn in his side that is probably the greatest qualifier in Formula One at the moment, that is Charles Leclerc. So that sort of step is in the way, but I mean, we'll rank everyone's best race at the end of the year, but it was definitely a very, very good one.
I think we got a proper race as well, because yes, it did feel like Verstappen was under control, but it was a stop versus a one stop, and with the if the late safety car didn't come because of Tsunoda's crash, it would have been Verstappen on the attack, and would he have overtaken Sainz or caught Sainz at the end? Probably, but we missed out on that, and it would have been quite close, I think. But instead, we got it. But
it was close. It was close anyway. I don't think. I think it's one. I think I've seen a few things go around saying stuff like, "Oh, George would have got past. Oh, Lewis would have got past. Oh, Fernando could have got past if you're in that car." I don't know. I actually think Sainz gave it, even at points when he was half a second, he's like going into the DRS and he couldn't get past. So I don't think it was Sainz. I think it was more a nature of where it was with the fact that it was attacking Verstappen. I think it's an annoying question to ask. Could Leclerc have done it? I think that's the wrong question to ask, to be honest, at the moment.
Yeah,
Sainz did very well.
I'm saying he didn't have the late safety car. It would have been a kind of thing with Verstappen trying to close that 10-second gap, and then it would have been him trying to. It wasn't easy. In fact, under control, because I think, like Sainz and Verstappen have said, Ferrari had the best car. They didn't, and I think that doesn't happen often in F1.
I'd have backed Verstappen to do it that way round, to be honest. I think I just back him in those situations to deliver, and especially with the Red Bull and with the straight line speed that they had, I think it would have been things would have had to go absolutely flawlessly for Sainz to win. And even though they went very well for him in terms of the way kind of fortune played out, I think there was just that when you're against someone, in the form that Verstappen is, of the quality that Verstappen is in the car that the Red Bull is, then it's going to be very difficult to beat him. And that's really why Leclerc's been the only one, because he's got, I think, in terms of the way he's driving, I think he's got the form and if Ferrari can deliver the car and the quality, but there's not many of the drivers on the grid who you can say that of. And yeah, I think it was another chance for kind of gone begging for Sainz to win a race. I think it's 5 second places now, but it's not. I don't view that as the biggest or the best chance that he's had. He could have done it, but it would have been difficult regardless.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it was the biggest chance, but I think it was a very good chance, and I think he drove very well to be in that chance. I think I get what you're saying now, Nigel, about if the roles were reversed between Verstappen and Sainz. And I think it's a hard one to draw a conclusion with based on the level of the Ferrari's top line speed, which was lacking all through. You could see the Alfa Romeos not being able to overtake anyone all through the race as well, because the Ferrari straight line speed power unit wasn't there, whereas other cars were able to manage that a lot better. That's why the Alpines were able to keep the Alfa Romeos so far behind, even with a little bit of weaving from Fernando and an engine problem, basically. So the Ferrari straight line speed was good whilst in the DRS, but wasn't great. Even if it was the fastest car across the track, the straight line speed is what you need for the overtake, and that was still in Red Bull's court. So I think it becomes an entirely different conundrum to address, which I think we kind of have a definite answer to based on, admittedly, very different cars at this stage in the season. But you look at the amount of races where Verstappen just overtook people and won. So we look at that, and that's still a trait of these cars. It's not been dialed out at all in a month. So it's as a role reversal. If we're going to put Verstappen in the lower straight line speed, that's an entirely different scenario. But then I think it would be a similar thing if Verstappen was in the Ferrari and Sainz in the Red Bull. I think it would be the same outcome, to be honest. That's my opinion of that, based on the performances we saw yesterday, which were, as we already have said, exemplary from the both.
The same outcome in the Red Bull winning and the Ferrari in second, or Verstappen winning and Sainz?
The same outcome as in not being able to overtake. So that if Verstappen was in second in the Ferrari, he would have stayed second at the end of the race.
Do you think, I mean, that's kind of interesting, but Ferrari may have had the fastest car, but overall, I think the Red Bull had the better car for Montreal, and that, I think you could, Freddie showed
that kind of goes against saying they have the fastest car. I haven't seen the comments that Nigel's been referring to about Sainz. I mean, even if they have, even if we're ranking the two cars, let's be honest, it's a 2/10 difference. It's negligible for the majority of the lap for this racing scenario. I think there's obviously a big gap between Verstappen and Sainz in qualifying, but that wasn't there on race pace at all. I think race pace, if we look at it, if we really were to delve into it, which is the research we haven't done for this podcast, it's called winging it for a reason, let's be honest. If we were to go into the nitty gritty of the lap times, I think, and stint times and lengths and so on, I think they'd actually be remarkably the same. And we can mull over which was the best car as much as we want. But let's be honest, the Ferrari and the Red Bull have been joined at the hip this year, just with different character traits. So when it comes to lap time, so I think we shouldn't really get bogged down in who had the fastest car, because it's not an answerable question, in my opinion, for a lot of these races.
Someone who definitely didn't have the slowest car on the Sunday was Sergio Perez, because he retired pretty early on in the race with the gearbox issue, which is that 5 or 7 retirements for Red Bull off the top of my head this season. Do you think that's a worry? Freddie's signing for me. Is that a worry? That how concerned do you think they should be about that? Is it big?
Gearbox issue, new issue. Gearbox issues happen. Really, it's the most issue that you can say. It just happens about Red Bull and Red Bull powertrains all year, in my opinion, because it's not a powertrain issue; it's a transmission issue.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I mean, Perez did initially say it was an engine problem, but I just don't know if he didn't want to kind of put it on the team, because the Red Bull gearbox is a Red Bull gearbox. So, yeah, I don't think they'll be too concerned about that. I think Ferrari is a little bit more fragile than Red Bull at the moment. So, and it does look like that these things we predict them as well. So, for the championship's sake, we kind of need Verstappen to have a DNF or two in the next few races. I don't think Red Bull will be too.
Sinister talk from Nigel. You see him around the back of a Red Bull with a screwdriver trying to get themselves in retirements. Although, you didn't hear that from us. While we're on the championship leaders, how would you sum up Leclerc's race, Freddie? Because he wouldn't drive with the day in the end. He finished 5th, but he struggled for a lot of it and then came good at the end. He kind of, it was a difficult one, and in the end, quite a satisfying one.
Yes, I think saving the mediums for the end of the race, second half of the race, was the best choice for Ferrari in that scenario. They could have been tempted to pitting under a VSC earlier, but I think having mediums, having an offset that was definitely going to be there late on, is the right call from them. I don't think he deserved driver of the day, to be honest. I think pretty much, if you were to look down the results of that field all the way to probably Magnussen. Well, Magnussen was last, probably Norris then. you would say that they all perform pretty well, actually. This is something I was going to bring up, which is kind of, you look at them and go, yeah, good. Yeah, did his job. Yeah, did his job. Yeah, did his job. I think that's why Leclerc didn't get to about fourth or something, because everyone else kind of did their job pretty well and weren't really putting many, weren't really having many slip-ups. So as much as I was impressed with Leclerc, I was equally impressed with quite a lot of other drivers on the day. So I think, it's the drive that was kind of the box tick for where he was. Like, yeah, I think fifth is kind of that, with what we've said about offset of straight line speed as well for the Ferrari. It's where it is. Nothing mega, nothing awful, and that's kind of what he needed to do. With, I think, the right decision to take an engine penalty this weekend, get it over and done with. Very interesting but bold call from Ferrari, which I think I wouldn't be surprised if we all agree on as the right idea moment. But it's all he really needed to do. He didn't do anything exceptional.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think definitely the right thing to do with the engine penalty. The performance itself saved a little, well, it was made easier with the safety car at the end, because many didn't have to come 15 seconds to Ocon and Alonso. Many straight on the tail of them, and then he overtook them. But he must have been so frustrated when he was behind. First, it was Bottas, Albon, and then later in the race, he was stuck behind Ocon. He looked so fit for Leclerc and didn't have any traction on the exits of the corners. So that was what meant that he couldn't overtake as easily. So a frustrating race, but the actual result probably be quite happy with, because he could have done that much better.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It reminded me a bit of Russia last year, where Verstappen kind of finished second, didn't he? I think, but it wasn't the kind of, he just had a race and
he was sick
ended
before
up well.
the rain, so that's
before the craziness.
Yeah, he was sick, and that was kind of the level. And you look at sort of Hamilton in Turkey as well. Another one is an example of where he was about fourth or fifth because of the cars in front just doing a good enough job to kind of be that little bit too far ahead.
Yes, Freddie has made my point for me expertly. So yeah, don't think it was a kind of well-beating performance from Leclerc, but he did the job well, and he's just about, I think it's 46 points off the top of my head now, the gap to Verstappen. So yeah, he needs a bit of luck, but it's not irrescuable yet, I would say. Moving on to the third member of the podium was Sir Lewis Hamilton, getting his first podium of the season, and for a car that he said was undrivable at second podium.
Sorry. Come on, Adam.
You're like Ted Kravitz when he said that in Monaco, and Sky put out a whole video going,
loads of people have made that mistake.
Yeah, you're in good company with the mistake, Adam, to be fair.
Well, I'll take that then. But it was for a car that he said was undrivable on Friday. It was a pretty good return to form, or return to the podium for Hamilton, and I think he just drove a good race, and he seemed pretty happy with where the car was at the end of it. And I think Mercedes' pace overall was very good. Do you think this is a false dawn, or do you think it does have the potential to kind of be a bit of a sea change for Mercedes? Where do you come down on the optimism stakes?
I think the track, well, it's one of Hamilton's best tracks. So for me, I've always thought if he really struggles in Montreal, then he is in big trouble. But he's lower rear wing than George Russell, which didn't help in qualifying because it was wet. But then in the race, bars everything really. He had probably his strongest showing since Australia, I think, when he lost out to Russell. So I think Mercedes. I think the problem is they're still 4 or 5 tenths behind, and even though the next few tracks might suit them more, that gap is quite a lot to make up, especially if Red Bull and Ferrari bringing upgrades. So I don't know. I think clearly the midfield now, that's for sure. I think they've moved away from Alpine and Alfa Romeo, but still at deficit to the top two teams. But I think he should be very happy with his performance.
Yeah, good performance. Impressive job from Mercedes, in my opinion, as a team from the Friday to Saturday window of setup development. That seemed to be where so much good work was done. They were running a lot of experimental stuff on Friday, and clearly they got some good results from how to apply that to the setup, which really helped both George and Lewis in just their feeling with the car. And I was incredibly impressed with just the way they just, as a team, were able just to dial in so much flow to that car. I completely agree with you, Nigel. If Lewis was really bad in Montreal, you'd kind of think, oh God, this is a good one for him. But it was a good one for him, so it's fine. And yeah, it's nice to see him get a podium. It was really nice to see him be really happy, to be honest.
Yes,
I would say, just because obviously he's been a bit in the dumps for obvious reasons because of his complete change of circumstance.
And his back.
So yeah, I think, yeah, very good drive. I think talking about the kind of dawn of Mercedes in this regard, he was 8 seconds off at the flag, not albeit 8 seconds off of the flag from a hooning it Verstappen and Sainz, which with 15 laps to go kind of isn't wonderful when the safety car was brought in. So when they were really turning it up, the Merc couldn't handle it. So there is that element to it. So it's a bit, I don't know. I think they're still on the experimenting stage of trying to figure out where to sort of then lay on top of this car. But I think they're really getting to it now. And I think it feels to me like it could be quite like how Red Bull were in every year in the past 10, apart from the ones every year since 2015, really, apart from last year and this year, where they're about this gap off at the start, and by the end of it, were on the level of the pace. And you think back to sort of where Red Bull have been at the end of seasons in like 2017, 18, and 19, they've always developed really nicely. I think that could be the story for Merc this year, just because they've kind of are really starting to understand that base level. But we'll have to see. But that's all it can really be, in my opinion, for Mercedes. I think it was just a very good drive. They capitalized on the fact that Perez was having a shocker and Leclerc was naturally out of the picture. But all being normal, it would have been a fifth. Let's be honest.
Do you think Hamilton got a kind of slice of luck of Russell he made a gamble to go on dry tyres in qualifying and didn't work out, and therefore started further back, so he wasn't, up until the last stint, he was kind of always on a different track to Hamilton, because when they were running together, then the Hamilton team to have slightly the better of him, but I think had they been qualified in a different position, that might not have been the case.
Yes, but no. I think Nigel would agree it was the right thing to do in qualifying, and
I agree.
It's the right risk to take, but it does get rid of that kind of opportunity to see where they are when push comes to shove in the final Q3 runs.
I thought stupid to do it from Russell with Gorman. I thought it was clearly too wet for dry tyres. So yeah, I thought that was a really silly pulling. The less said.
But do you think that benefited Hamilton not really having the direct competition with Russell in the race for a large part of it?
That's deep.
It does, because Russell made a mistake and Hamilton didn't. That makes sense.
Okay.
But
Yeah. I think
in the race,
that's fair enough.
Well, there we go. Heard it from both sides. So yeah, I think that's covered the top five. Now we've gone through Leclerc. I think overall it was quite a strong weekend for a lot of people. Someone who had a very strong Saturday, and then it just, a bit like Leclerc for a lot of the race, it just didn't kind of run correctly for him in the end. Fernando Alonso finished behind his teammate in the end, which was a bit of a shame. But how do you think it was just, I don't know, just kind of circumstance for Alonso? Was there anything he could have done better to, make more of his front row start?
Not really. I don't think there's anything he could have done better. I think he was driving for the majority of the race without interruption. He was driving pretty well from the regard of minimum race time, which is what he should have done. That was kind of how he should have been racing, and that was how he was racing. He wasn't holding up Sainz too much, but he wasn't, making it easy for them to get past. And that's, what he needs to do. You look back at kind of midfield high points, they've got to really not put up too much of a fight unless they think they can do it. And I think Alpine, as much as they were saying they were going for it, if they didn't get past into turn one, then it was minimum race time, try and race for fifth. And they got sixth and seventh on the road, sixth and ninth, if you take into account Fernando's penalty afterwards for weaving, which you should because it's the result. But so it kind of, the qualifying was the highlight of the weekend. It was a bit downhill, but the race was, for the most part, was managed very well. They just were impeded a bit hampered by that safety car for Tsunoda. Didn't really flow with them. Did flow for Ocon, but it also worked really well for the Alfa Romeos, who were able to sort of sit on their tail with some very good race pace. So I think it was still a well-managed race, and they were still the fourth fastest car across the weekend, but the Alfa Romeo was very good as well, which kind of didn't help. Ocon and Alonso both are just very good race drivers. It was just the circumstance wasn't necessarily wonderful for Fernando Alonso this time out.
I really kind of not well. It's a shame that we didn't get to see Alonso what we saw in Budapest last year when they were battling over the final 10-15 laps. I thought we might get more the same this time round, but obviously the engine problem meant Hamilton just breezed by. And I think Alpine's strategy as well, they were a bit unlucky with the timing of the virtual safety cars, but then they could have still pitted under the first one with Hines. So that was a shame. So it just all kind of went the wrong way up along, and then top it off with the weaving on the final lap, which was right because it was like, well, it was out of order really from Alonso. I was just frustrated with being behind and knowing that he's generally been a lot quicker all weekend and then to finish behind. So I can understand it, but it's stupid last lap. So yeah, 9th isn't what Alonso deserved.
No, I think that's fair enough. Yeah, isn't what he deserved for the lap. But would you say the minimum of what we've seen from all the weaving was the 5 seconds was what he deserved for the penalty?
Yeah, so basically he was going down the back straight, coming out of a hairpin, and he moved at least 3 or 4 times, and Bottas was forced to lift out of it. So yeah, it wasn't really on. And well, we've seen a lot. I think what it is with Alonso, he thinks a lot of other drivers get away with these kind of things, kind of racecraft type antics. So that's why he does it himself, almost to try and make a point. That's how I've always, seen about it. There was a thing last year about back limits on the first lap. Now drivers will go off at turn 1, then come back on and get in positions. And then did it himself or something a few races later, and then he got a penalty after. So I know there's a bit of that, and obviously earlier this year he said something about FIA and about last year's controversial Abu Dhabi thing. So yeah, frustrating for Alonso.
I agree. I think it was a worthy penalty, but I also agree. I think he's right. A few people do get away with things, but he does do it that little bit more on the nose to try and make that point, and he just kind of think, well, it's fine. Oh no, I've done. It's like, well, no, you've still broken the rule, Fernando. Just the best way to do this is to say, oh, people are doing things, rather than maybe to do it, maybe. But I don't know. He's probably tried. He has tried that, to be fair. But I think he's right. I think you're right. A few people do get away with it. But yeah, still, I thought you would get a bigger penalty, to be honest.
Yeah, I think Fernando's he's a pantomime villain, I think, and he likes that role. I think, in his own mind. And yeah, it's one of those. But I thought, particularly from Ocon, that it was a fantastic race. He would have been my driver of the day personally, I think anyway. But yeah, I think overall it's still a good race for Alpine. It's just, I think what might have been from where we were at the start. But I mean, Verstappen got a stonking start and Alonso didn't really. Alonso was more pressure from where was behind him than being able to put pressure on Verstappen. So it was kind of early on showing that wasn't going to be the case. But yeah, it was a race. It's still a fantastic front row for Alpine. And moving through, you just mentioned them, the two Alfa Romeos. It was a good, really good race from Alfa Romeo. They, double points haul, 10 points into double figures. It's just, I don't know. It feels like this has been threatening to come, or it's, this is kind of where the kind of maximum of Bottas being the, kind of elder statesman within the team and Zhou being the exciting rookie. That's, I guess, this feels like the kind of potential that you have from a driver pairing like that, where they've both got quality despite kind of some of Zhou's drawbacks. So yeah, Freddie, how do you analyse their race? Second double points finish of the season.
Yeah, second double points finish of the season. And very good double points finish. Well deserved. Both drivers really properly deserved those points. If they weren't handed to them, and they drove it very well all throughout the weekend. Good weather performance from both drivers. Bottas was a 10th of Q3. Zhou had his first Q3 appearance ever. And wasn't just the 10th place guy. He was in the fight for the 9th place with Ricciardo and 8th with whoever was 8th. And it was a good job. It was impressive. And both of them had good race pace. Admittedly, that top end speed from the Ferrari engine wasn't there, like I mentioned earlier, which made it a bit difficult. So Zhou was stuck behind Mick Schumacher for a bit until he retired. And then obviously both of them couldn't quite put up that fight for the Alpines, and they could have got more points. It was an issue that maybe needs to be addressed. Maybe they need to just mess around with some gear ratios or something. But it was a good showing. And last week we were the Baku, we were despairing over Zhou not managing to get to the end of the race once again because of a technical issue, when he was probably on target for a points finish, and it being a really good drive for him that was promising, and he's delivered on that promise the week after. So that was good, because he was the defining Alfa Romeo driver this weekend. Bottas had a few more strategic fortunes. That made sense. Had a bit more strategic fortune. But Zhou was there right on his tail at the end anyway. So hats off to both of them. Hats off to that team for having such a good turnaround into this year and being able to make it last in their race pace. It's been very impressive, and I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think Alfa Romeo earlier in the year at Imola, and I think there was another race as well. They had third or fourth fastest car, and then they went through a bit of a bad patch. But then in Canada, at the weekend, they looked like probably fourth best team, I think, on Sunday, I'd say. So then I think Zhou has probably made the most of that. And the last few race weekends, he's looked like a proper F1 driver, and considering all the stick that he got when he was announced last year, I think full credit, especially with when he went through 4 or 5 races where he didn't really perform that well. He bounced back from it. He found something, and he's clearly taken some, quite a lot of confidence from that. So I think Zhou deserves a lot of credit. Hopefully he can keep that up. But if he keeps performing like this, there's no reason why he shouldn't be in F1 next year.
Completely agree.
Words from Nigel. Yeah, I don't know. It's just nice to see him doing well. I think he just seems to have come in and really applied himself, which is, all you can do as a rookie, really, and he's reaped the benefits, certainly. And then rounding out the top 10 was the homeboy himself, Lance Stroll, who snuck in at the end. It was a difficult race for Aston Martin, particularly Sebastian Vettel, but Stroll did okay, and picked up a point for his trouble. So Freddie, a word on his weekend.
It fell into place for him a bit because his qualifying was dire. Yes, Aston Martin's qualifying was dire, but his was dire, Danny Dyer. And he was a full second off Sebastian Vettel, and Lance Stroll is good in the wet. So something clearly wasn't clicking for him or the team there. But, played the race very well, started on the hards, and obviously that then played into his hands later down the line. Vettel had a really weird scenario where he pitted twice in the first 15 laps or whatever, one of them under VSC, one of them not, I think. And that was just weird. And then obviously trying to make those tyres last for a shed load of time and didn't really work, which meant that he was kind of falling out of the points at the end of the race when he probably could have had a nice little offset, but I think he'd used up too many of his tyres. So wasn't able to fight for the points, which is where his pace had put him very early on anyway. He'd done a better race than Stroll until that point, just it worked better for Stroll at the end of it. So Aston Martin at least understood that and got that point for Stroll.
Yeah. And speaking, unless Nigel, do you want to add a word on?
Yeah, I was just going to say, yes, they got points, but I was expecting a bit more from Aston Martin. This Vettel usually goes around the world, goes well around Canada. Yeah, it's Stroll's home track, so maybe he can do something a bit more. And given her pace in the last couple of races before Canada, I don't know. I just thought it would be more towards the front end of the midfield and do a kind of in the middle of the midfield instead. And yes, it's close, but I would have been slightly disappointed if I was there with the place. But we'll do better next time around.
Yeah, I think it's a case of go again. I kind of didn't have too many fingers crossed for them really going into the weekend, but we'll see how they're kind of whether they're whether they continue to fight close to the front of the pack over the next few rounds back in Europe. But Freddie mentioned Dyer earlier. There was a double diet for McLaren and Haas, who, it was just not great, kind of on any level really. They struggled over the weekend, and I think apart from
they didn't struggle over the weekend.
No,
I mean, Haas got their best ever qualifying in their time in F1 with 5th and 6th.
As I was saying,
really.
As I was saying that, I realised it was Norris. Norris was 14th, but the other 3 drivers got into Q3, so I am chatting out my arse. But yeah, it just did fall apart on race day, and Mick kind of dropped back early on, and then had his retirement, and it was as Zhou was overtaking him. It looked like he was surprised that Zhou was there, but actually, I think he might have just been surprised that his engine was going pop. But and both Magnussen ended up finishing last out of the finishers, and both McLarens are out the points as well. So it's just a really tough weekend all round for the British-American duo.
McLaren's race management was not very nice. Their bad pit stops across the board, which just threw them away, and it just wasn't really working for them. Haas had that race kind of stolen from them in very sad, upsetting ways, because they could have really been up there with Alpine and Alfa Romeo, in my opinion, at the end, because they were doing all right at keeping the Alfa Romeos behind in the points. Mick was about 7th or 8th when he was retired, and Magnussen was 5th when he had got the black and orange flag, the meatball flag for his front wing, where he was still keeping that pace there. Admittedly, his front wing was peeling apart, so that needed to be changed, which is an annoying situation for him, because that pace was there for them, and that race is kind of just sort of sprinkled away, because Haas did do a very good job that weekend, and Magnussen then ran those tyres until the end of the race, which is why he was 17th, but which is probably the only mark I'd put against Haas this weekend, to be honest, which is they probably could have put on soft or something at the end and just had a bit of a play with Magnussen, but they didn't. But yeah, McLaren were operationally not very good, in my opinion, this weekend, and that's what's let them down.
Yeah, I think they've got some big front. The car is just bang average. It is average in the corners. It's arguably the worst on the straights, or one of the worst. And Norris, I think he had a sensor issue in qualifiers, which started down the order. And then the double stack, which is probably the right idea, but if you're going to do it, make sure you get it right. And I don't know how long Norris's pit stop was, but he was waiting for at least 15 seconds, I think. And then that ruined his race. Ricciardo, when Norris is having those problems, kind of need him to, be there to get points, to kind of threaten it, really. So I can't, even that, I think it is the car. I think the car is just, it's not got many, there's not many weaknesses, but it's not got months either. It's just kind of everywhere. That was a problem. You know, at the start of the season, I went on a massive rant in Bahrain about McLaren, and then he got better. So I thought, but then now it's kind of coming back. So it's difficult to say where they're at, but I should say because we're up there, and with Alpine getting difficult to get place this year, I think for them. So yeah, difficult. What questions I've got for Magnussen? Should he have been so on the first lap? We saw a similar thing in Spain when they made contact, and should he have been given the black and orange flag? Because I thought that was quite harsh because his front wing wasn't exactly.
I think because the front wing end plate was significantly kind of moving per lap, that it kind of like there was then question of structural integrity for parts of the wing. I think that's really what it was. And when it's raised by Ocon, even if it is Ocon being a bit cheeky with it, when that happens, you kind of have to kind of think, oh, well, we've got to give the benefit of the doubt for this scenario from the Alpine perspective behind, which is a shame for that regard. But yeah, that kind of thing needs to be checked. And I think if we think back to Suzuka 2019, where bits then just suddenly came off Leclerc's wing and nearly went into Hamilton's visor and helmet behind him after Ferrari didn't pit, then you look at it from that perspective, it's kind of like, okay, well, you need to act on that actually a bit quickly.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, it's an unlucky one because I think Magnussen could have, well, yeah, who knows how it would have shaken out with the pit stops, but yeah, I think Magnussen kind of could have done a good job for Haas, and yeah, it's kind of a difficult weekend all round for them. But I don't know. I think they'll be back. I think it's a positive. You know, Mick, he didn't have the best race even before his retirement, but I think, you know, it's a positive step. It's more positive than he's been in the last few weeks. So kind of hopefully that
the ninth in the championship, and they really shouldn't. The car they've got, they should at least be 6th or 7th. I think they've made so many mistakes. Yes, Canada is more, you know, the engine potentially, and Maxson being unlucky, but they've thrown away so many points with strategy or driver errors. They should be much higher. They should have more points on the table, but I don't know. I think I just don't have. I have very little confidence in Haas, and I think Canada and the last few races before that have kind of proved why. They don't seem to operate as well as other teams, and I don't know if that's, you know, a problem with the management or something else, but there's always seems to be a mistake in their weekend. They can't seem to execute clean weekends. That is frustrating.
It is.
Well,
yes, it is frustrating. Complete agreement there.
Yes, but next time, I don't know. I hope. Yeah, it's even. Yeah, I just think, you know, if they can get it all together, they'll be looking good. But can they? That is the question, which we'll find out next week. Are there any other drivers you want to give a word in the positive or negative category to?
Tsunoda's crash was silly.
Freddie was about a second away from saying that.
Tsunoda's crash was silly, but the rest of his driving across the weekend was really good, and his crash really annoyed me because the crash was so silly. It's kind of like, you're doing so well this weekend. You've been having a very good weekend, Yuki. For goodness sake, you've been the better AlphaTauri driver until that point this year, but fine. And also, I was going to touch on the two Williams drivers.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, yeah, Latifi's home race wasn't necessarily wonderful. Your classic Latifi performance. There's rumours going around that he's going to be announced the dropping of him is going to be announced at Silverstone. Whether that will happen, we don't know, because there's always rumours that something will be announced at Silverstone. And Alex Albon actually was messed around with safety cars and whatnot, because he actually had a really cracking first half of the race. He fought his way up to the points and was staying there on virtue and merit. Only then sort of lost that because of Leclerc, really, but was on that point fight legitimately and a very, you know, stonking little drive, in my opinion, until safety cars and scenarios and messy bits.
Yeah, he basically pitted a lap before the second virtual safety car, so lap 18 he pitted, but then the virtual safety car lap 19, so everyone else got cheaper pit stop and jumped him. So that was unfortunate because Albon, again, for probably the 50,000th race in a row, has been driving very well. So that's nice to see. Even I'll say that.
Hey, yeah, he was the one. He was the one I was going to shout out. He was just very unlucky, and yeah, you've outlined how it went with him in the pits. It was, I think he can take a lot out of this weekend, and hopefully he can carry that on into his home race pretty much. So yeah, fingers crossed for Albon because I think he deserves something after that race. I think so. Yeah. But unless there's anyone else, I just want to give a word to the Canadian Grand Prix because I was very excited before it and it lived up to my expectations. I give it a solid 7.5 out of 10. And yeah, I was after a couple of editions away, it was nice to see it back. And it's kind of the track itself doesn't seem to be the best on paper, but it delivered this weekend, and I was happy with that. Freddie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the Canadian Grand Prix. I just do. I mean, I enjoy good Grand Prix to be honest, but did feel very good, little party atmosphere. I have my classic FOMO for a good looking Grand Prix when it comes to a big crowd in a city. That's where I just want to be. So I had my Grand Prix FOMO for that. And yeah, I want to go to Montreal, guys.
And that's why we're starting a Patreon.
Do not stand for Formula One. Yeah.
All right. I will.
On that note,
still, I missed half of what you said, but I'm just going to disagree with
you.
Nigel, you idiot.
That's always the best policy. It's an absolutely ridiculous comment to say. But thank you very much for listening, everyone. And we shall be back to preview the British Grand Prix. It's coming home, even if it isn't coming home in terms of a British driver. But thank you very much for listening and goodbye.
Bye. Bye.